Shabbat Shalom. We just learned about the idea, at least the concept of the Jubilee. The concept that with inequality and inequity in society, there should be a reset button to make sure that that inequality doesn't bear burden upon us, isn't a yoke that we have to carry generation after generation after generation. Midrash gives the example in Vayikra Rabbah that if one's donkey has a load on their back that is too heavy, that person needs to remove the load and lighten the load for the donkey. Why? Because eventually if the donkey collapses on all fours, there aren't enough people that can lift that donkey up and sustain that donkey. Without trying to compare any of us to a donkey, the idea of the Midrash, I think, is quite clear. That it's our responsibility to lighten another person's load. It's not a mentality of they need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, but that it's our job to lighten another person's load. In fact, among all the laws about the Jubilee, laws about land ownership and debt collection, we're told in verse 35 of chapter 25 of Vayikra, V'chi yamuch achicha umatay yado imach v'echezakta bo ger v'toshav v'chai imach. That if one of your people, a friend, a neighbor, your kinsfolk, comes under hardship, financial straits, you are not obligated, are obligated to make sure you don't treat them any differently. And in fact, you're obligated to lighten their load, the chai imach, so that they are seen as living side by side with you. And there's no difference, talks about a ger toshav, there's no difference if that person is a neighbor, if that person is a sojourner, if that person was born here or is an immigrant. The text is quite clear. Whatever hardship one faces, it's your responsibility, our responsibility to lighten their hardship. And that's an interesting command and obligation. Right? It's more than just an obligation to do charity, to give tzedakah. Because one of the challenges with giving tzedakah is that unless we make societal change, tzedakah helps somebody for the moment, but then somebody may need tzedakah again in the short term or in the long term going forward. This is talking about lightening one's load so that that need will no longer be needed and they're able to provide for themselves. It's like the two verses that are juxtaposed in Deuteronomy chapter 15 when we're told that there shall be no needy among us, but as long as there are, we shall not close our hands, our hearts to them. This is telling us, yes, we give tzedakah, but we need to lighten somebody's load so that whatever makes them vulnerable, whatever makes them feel less than in society, be it debt or lack of funds and financial wherewithal, be it lack of land and land ownership, be it lack of employment, whatever it may be, we're supposed to lighten their load. And so in the Midrash Vayikra Rabbah, it goes on to say that a Roman, Turnus Rufus, challenges the great Rabbi Akiva and asks, you say your God is so great. Why are you commanded to provide for those who have less than you do? Why doesn't God provide for those in need? And Rabbi Akiva thinks about it for a second, and he answers in two ways. First, he says, we are God's partners in creation, so by us helping those in need, that is God helping those in need. But two, this is a reminder that just because we are blessed and have a life full of blessings now, at any moment, any of us may be those ones who have a load that is too heavy to carry. If we forget that there are those around us who are in need and don't help them, then God forbid we may be in need, who will be there to help us? And I think that's ultimately the lesson. The idea of the Jubilee is not possible, I think, in a society, one, where we live lifetimes longer than was expected in Torah, but also in a society in which our wealth is a historical wealth, passed down from generation to generation often. And even if that wasn't the case for some of us, we want it to be the case for our own children and grandchildren, that we want them to have the benefits and blessings that we worked hard for. And yet, we're commanded similarly that we must do our parts to make sure that those who don't have the blessings that we have are blessed, to make sure that those who have hardships that we have not experienced are comforted, to make sure that their loads are lightened. Because it's only then that this society that we heard about, this vision of a world that the Torah talks about, we come to realize, not, as Turnus Rufus and Midrash suggests, when God provides, but as Rabbi Akiva responds, when we all provide for each other. That's our task. Now we need to get to work to make it so.